It started with the splash. That unforgettable sound of an engine-laden boat hitting my private ranch lake just past dawn. The sound shattering the early morning quiet like a shotgun blast through glass. I had just stepped onto the dock with a cup of coffee in hand, still in my boots and flannel from checking the livestock pens, when I saw it, a pontoon boat, bright red, noisy, and driven by a man I didn't recognize, dragging tubes and hooting with kids in tow like it was some public water park. I waved my arms, trying to get his attention, shouting that it was private property. He just gave me a confused shrug and yelled back, "Karen said it was fine." That name hit me like a cold slap. Karen Whitmore, president of our neighborhood HOA, self-declared Queen of the Covenants. She lived across the ridge in a newer house built long after my family homesteaded here. And from the beginning, she treated the land like it was hers to parcel out at whim. But this was new. This was bold. Renting out or handing off my lake like she had some say over it. I stormed back up the hill to my ranch house, fuming, heart pounding with the slow simmer of someone who'd been disrespected one too many times. I didn't bother calling Karen. I knew exactly where she'd be a sighting in that faux Victorian HOA building the board had somehow greenlit 2 years back, probably sipping overpriced coffee and plotting the next community improvement project that somehow always cost everyone else money and gave her more control. I drove straight to the HOA office, tires spitting gravel behind me, as Rufus barked in the bed of the truck, just as angry as I was. The office was locked of course, but her silver Lexus sat right out front. I pounded on the glass until the receptionist, a nervous college kid named Ellie, cracked the door. "She's in a meeting," she stammered. "Cancel it," I growled. "It's about my damn lake." Karen appeared seconds later, clipboard in hand, smug smile like she'd just won the lottery. "Oh, you must be confused," she said sweetly. The HOA passed an easement allowing limited recreational access to the lake for community members and their guests. It was voted on last month. I stared at her, stunned. "You mean the lake my family dug and filled with our well system 30 years ago? The one that's clearly marked on every deed as private property?" She waved a hand like that was a minor detail. "It's part of the greater community ecosystem now. You weren't at the last meeting, so the board proceeded." I felt my jaw clench. I hadn't been at that meeting because I was in town handling permits for a cattle sale, something Karen knew. This wasn't oversight. This was an ambush. And it got worse. She handed me a printout of a temporary shared use ordinance she'd filed with the county land use office. A fraudulent document with a doctored signature line, and my name typed in like I'd agreed to it.
This audio was created with Podcastle.ai.
Signature line, and my name typed in like I'd agreed to it. I took one look and said, "You forged this." She blinked, feigned offense, but I saw the flicker of guilt behind her eyes. "You'll want to be careful throwing around accusations like that," she warned. Legal action could go both ways. Oh, how right she was. I didn't waste another word on her. I turned and walked straight out of that building, dialing James and the Caffrey before I even reached my truck. James wasn't just a lawyer. He was the lawyer you called when things got messy, when you needed someone who could quote rural property law like scripture and tear through HOA bylaws like wet tissue paper. "She did what?" He barked into the phone after I explained. "You got 5 minutes to send me photos of that forged ordinance and any other evidence you can scrape up. This is war now." I sent it all photos. Emails she'd CC'd me on weeks prior referencing community access plans. A map she'd included in the HOA newsletter showing a dock built right off my land labelled public picnic area, and even a video I'd filmed of her cousin launching that pontoon boat like it was his personal lake. That same afternoon, James filed an emergency injunction with the county court to halt any further use of the lake. But that didn't stop Karen. Oh no. The next morning, she showed up on my property with 2 sheriff deputies, waving papers and shouting that I had violated the HOA's shared asset agreement and had illegally fenced off common space. I stepped out with my original deed in one hand and a GoPro strapped to my chest. "You're trespassing," I said. "This land is not, has never been, and will never be HOA property." One of the deputies looked uncertain, but Karen pressed forward, saying I had resisted board decisions and would be arrested for obstruction. Before they could so much as blink, James bless that man arrived on scene in his Jeep, tie half-tied, court documents in hand, and shut it down. "You so much as lay a finger on my client, and I'll file charges of unlawful detainment and conspiracy to commit fraud against every name on that board," he told the deputies. "Start with this forged ordinance," he added, handing them a printed version alongside a notarized copy of the original deed. That moment was the turning point. The cops backed off. Karen's face went white, and the game changed entirely. But I wasn't satisfied just defending myself. I wanted the HOA dismantled piece by corrupt piece. I spent the next 48 hours gathering everything. Every memo, every email, every voicemail, every shady vote that Karen had pushed through under the radar. I found budget misallocations, secretly approved dues hikes, and even an unauthorized landscaping contract with a company owned by her brother-in-law. I wasn't just building. A defensie was preparing a nuke. James and I drafted a formal complaint with the State Attorney General's office, alleging fraud, abuse of power, forgery, and misappropriation of funds by the HOA. But that wasn't the most satisfying part. What really made it sing was the trap we laid next. We filed a motion to hold an emergency homeowners assembly under the HOA's own bylaws, citing leadership misconduct and fraudulent activity as grounds for immediate board review. Karen tried to block the meeting by cancelling it last minute, so we moved it to my ranch and live-streamed the whole thing. Over 60 homeowners showed up, most of them furious about rising dues, unfair citations, and now the lake scandal. We presented our evidence on a giant projection screen, doctored maps, faked signatures, and a pie chart showing how over 40% of HOA dues had been funneled into beautification projects that suspiciously centered around Karen's house and her cousin's property. The crowd turned hostile, not toward me, but toward her. Shouts erupted. Someone called for a vote to disband the board entirely, and before Karen...
This audio was created with podcastle.ai.
Someone called for a vote to disband the board entirely, and before Karen could even collect her voice, the motion passed with a clear majority. In that moment, the HOA was suspended, pending investigation. But I wasn't finished. With James's help, I filed paperwork to form an independent landowners trust and submitted a formal motion to dissolve the HOA completely using legal provisions in the original founding articles. Turns out, buried deep in the HOA's original charter was a clause that allowed for dissolution with a 2/3 vote by landowners in the event of financial or ethical corruption, something Karen clearly never thought anyone would notice. The next week, we held that vote. It wasn't even close. With 78 out of 94 landowners present and 69 voting in favor of immediate dissolution, the HOA was effectively dead by sundown. Karen stormed out of the meeting halfway through the vote, face twisted in disbelief, spouting threats about legal challenges and personal defamation suits, but nobody followed her. For the first time in years, people stood up, shoulder to shoulder, against the reign of fear she had instilled, and it was like watching a community breathe again after holding its breath for far too long. But James and I weren't naive. We knew she wouldn't go quietly. Sure enough, within days, Karen tried to file an emergency injunction to reinstate the HOA on the grounds that the vote was illegally conducted. Unfortunately for her, she submitted the paperwork to the same county judge who had reviewed the lake ordinance forgery, and the case was dismissed before she could even speak in court. Then came the press. A local reporter caught wind of the HOA scandal and aired a special segment titled Ranch Rebellion. how one man brought down an HOA empire. The story went viral in our region. Journalists showed up, and the more they dug, the more corruption they uncovered. Multiple board members linked to shady real estate transfers, kickbacks on maintenance contracts, and even a falsified environmental report used to fine one neighbor into selling his property below value. Those board members disappeared fast. Karen, however, went nuclear. She started a smear campaign against me personally, printing flyers, running a bitter Facebook group, even going so far as to show up at town hall meetings trying to spread lies about my business dealings. What she didn't count on was the county land assessor publicly confirming that my lake, my fences, my wells, all of it was legally protected by generations-old deeds, filed correctly and cleanly long before the HOA ever existed. James responded to her campaign with a defamation suit so precise and brutal that she had to settle within a week, agree to a public apology, and withdraw from all remaining civic boards. I used the settlement money to restore the land Karen's cousin had torn up with that boat, reseeded the shoreline with native grass, and built a new dock this time with a locked gate and a camera surveillance system that uploads footage straight to the cloud. You'd think dissolving the HOA would be the end of it. But no, Karen wasn't the kind of woman who faded quietly into a headline and a footnote. The moment the ink dried on the court order finalizing the HOA's shutdown, she switched tactics from public warfare to backdoor sabotage. At first, it was small things, rumors about my taxes, whisper campaigns that my ranch wasn't up to code, anonymous letters to the county claiming my livestock were polluting the local watershed. But I had seen this playbook before. James warned me. She's wounded now. Cornered people are dangerous. So I fortified. Not just legally, but literally. I invested in perimeter upgrades, brought in a surveyor to reflag every inch of my land, and installed solar-powered trail cameras at key points across my acreage. The lake now had motion-activated spotlights and a locked gate system tied to my phone. Karen's cousin tried to launch his boat again one Sunday morning, got caught on cam, cited for trespassing, and the footage was uploaded to the sheriff's office before he even docked. That only poured gas on the fire. The cousin filed a complaint with the county claiming public right of access due to historical recreational usage, a term James laughed out loud at in Bra. Court because no such precedent existed in our jurisdiction and because I had 3 decades of documented ownership and full restriction history to shut it down. But while the legal threats kept getting swatted away, something far more dangerous was happening quietly in the background. Karen had begun rallying a faction of former board loyalists, hoping to form a new neighborhood preservation committee, which wasn't technically an HOA, but acted exactly like one. They met in garages, at diners, and through encrypted group chats, planning to establish a new governance structure over the same land we'd just freed. One neighbor, a retired veteran named Clay, slipped me a recording of one of their meetings where Karen openly admitted her plan to reclassify zoning around the lake to limit my use of shared natural resources. That recording became our next weapon. James took that audio straight to the county commission and filed a preemptive injunction to block any reclassification attempts tied to that so-called neighborhood preservation committee. But this wasn't just about legal strikes. Anymore, it was about protecting my neighbors from being dragged back into the same pit we'd just climbed out of. So we started gathering testimonies. Over the next 2 weeks, one by one, people came to my ranch with stories of intimidation, surprise inspections, and even fines that had no legal standing. One woman, Sheila from the North Ridge, revealed that Karen's group had threatened to report her husband for illegal beekeeping unless they joined the new committee. I compiled everything: documents, video, audio, first-hand statements, and with James's help, we prepared a community dossier that outlined the entire shadow operation. Then we did something bold. We held a town hall at the local community center and invited a reporter from the regional paper. We didn't call it a protest, we called it a reclamation forum. James opened with a short speech, then passed the mic to folks who'd been harassed, fined, or falsely accused. The emotional weight in the room grew with every voice. By the end, the room was quiet until one old rancher stood and said, "I fought for this country. I won't live under a two-bit dictator in a cul-de-sac." The place erupted. The next day, the paper ran a front-page piece, "Freedom versus Fear, a town's battle with the HOA that wouldn't die." The fallout was swift. Karen's supporters began dropping away like leaves in autumn. Two of her closest allies publicly resigned from the so-called Preservation Committee, calling it a fraud. That's when Karen snapped. She launched her final offensive in full view of the town.
This audio was created with podcastle.ai.
She launched her final offensive in full view of the town. Within days of the newspaper article, she filed a lawsuit against me personally, James professionally, the local paper for libel, and the entire neighborhood's landowners group for collusion and organized quark. Harassment. It was a Hail Mary, built on toothpicks, poorly structured, emotionally written, and filled with conspiracy claims that no sane judge would entertain. But she filed it anyway, hoping to buy time, spread confusion, and slow Barras. Momentum. The suit itself wasn't the real danger. It was the fact that she used it to subpoena private documents, including property records, tax returns, and even my ranch's livestock health certificates, trying to dig warm up anything she could turn into leverage. But James was already ahead of her. He filed a motion to strike the lawsuit under the state's anti-SLAPP laws rules, specifically designed to protect citizens from being bullied into silence through bogus litigation. The hearing took place 3 weeks later, and I'll never forget that courtroom. Karen, sitting with a new high-powered attorney flown in from the city, smug and confident, like she thought this was her redemption arc. James stood up, calm and crisp, and dismantled the case with surgical precision. He played clips of Karen threatening retaliation, read statements from residents detailing coercion, and submitted our community's dossier into official record. Then, as a final blow, he presented an affidavit from Karen's own cousin the boat guy who had turned on her after she tried to throw him under the bus, stating in writing that she had knowingly lied about the lake's ownership and forged documents to create the illusion of access. The judge dismissed her entire case with prejudice and sanctioned her for abuse of the legal process. She was ordered to pay all legal fees, mine, James's, and the papers. It was over. Finally, truly over. With the final court ruling in hand, I walked back to my ranch that evening under a sky painted in orange and purple, the lake calm, reflecting the sunset like a mirror. The peace wasn't just quiet, it was earned. Karen's remaining supporters evaporated overnight, and her presence in the town vanished as fast as her reputation. Her house went up for sale, her social media disappeared, and by the end of the month, she'd packed her Lexus and left town without a goodbye. In the wake of her departure, the community began to heal. With no HOA, the air felt different, lighter. Families repainted homes without permit hassles, kids set up lemonade stands without fear of fines, and folks began waving at each other again like neighbors should. As for me, I took everything I'd learned and helped form a new committee, not to rule, but to serve. We called it the Landowners Circular Volunteer Group, focused on helping locals understand their property rights, avoid scams, and stay independent of overreaching associations. James became an honorary member, and every third Thursday, we'd meet in the barn with hot coffee, fresh cornbread, and a whiteboard ready to tackle whatever came next. I even got a letter from the county commissioner thanking me for restoring order through resilience and lawful persistence, something I hung up right next to my grandfather's old cattle brand as a reminder that some battles are worth every scar. One afternoon, a new family moved into Karen's old house. They stopped by, introduced themselves, and said, "We heard a legend about a man who defended this lake like a castle." I just smiled, patted Rufus on the head, and said, "It's not a legend. It's just what happens when you stand your ground." And with the lake glistening behind me, the wind rustling through the trees, and not a single HOA paper in sight, I knew one thing for sure: Freedom doesn't come from fighting every battle. It comes from winning the one that counts,